That's great. Thank you. So, that was a really nice introduction. Not sure I'm deserving, to be honest, but I am incredibly blessed because I get to sit in this chair, and sometimes I'm out in the field with my, power beats in my ears, and I do the conversations that way. But I'm incredibly blessed because I get to have this interaction with real people doing real things every single day. Whether it's someone growing cannabis or it's somebody growing hemp or tropicals or um, radicchio, which is like a cabbage-like crop, or tomatoes, you name it. So, and I'll slip in a couple odd stories along the way that'll point to just the eclectic exposure that I've had by virtue of the people that have been so kind to give me an opportunity to opine on their lives. And while I sit here and I look at the screen, for some reason, I just see Joe right in the center of my screen. So you're a good looking guy, Joe, I got to tell you. But so it's throwing me off though. um, but
Yeah, I see you, so I'm not sure
it's
why,
good.
but
It's
the
all
rest of
good.
us, I think, are looking at you. So
Well, I chose this, I guess, tropical scene, if you will, just to kind of mix it up a little bit today. And besides, that's really my happy place. When the water's crashing in and my brain is washing back out with the tide, then I can just sit back and sip on something. But that said, I want to tell you some quick background stories because my son Josh stole a lot of like kind of so-called zingers for me, things about my life, and you know, we've been through a lot, and uh, I brought some 30 years ago two Russian high level colloidal scientists, Dr. Boris Levinsky and Dr. Svetlana Kurchenko, over from Irkutsk, as you heard from Josh. And I brought along a translator and his wife, who was an attorney, and their daughter. So there are five of them, and I brought them over. And the first words that I heard when I parked them in the tenant house that we had for them here on the property, the business property, was, "Where is my jacuzzi?" So the female scientist was very much interested in a jacuzzi, and she thought that the streets of the United States were paved with gold. And unfortunately, I looked back and I said to the translator, "We work here and we work very hard, and so will you." In a year and a half, they were gone because they decided that they enjoyed vodka more than they did work. So I sent them packing back to what was then St. Petersburg. But in that year and a half, I learned a lot of things. I learned how to fail. I learned how to do molecular extraction of humic and fulvic molecules because I had formed this joint venture with an Australian machine guy and a New Zealander who was kind of like your honest broker, which was kind of humorous at the end, and then the Russian folks, and they were very smart, just like vodka. So all that said, and what we did was we learned about that, as Josh put it, that building block to the foundation of your home. Um, Humic and fulvic acids are really fascinating building blocks. I look at them as the way to build the foundation of products because within reason, you almost can't go wrong using those molecules as foundation building blocks, whether it be to a soluble powder formulation, a granular formulation, or a liquid concentrate, and even by themselves. And at that juncture, I want to skip to the side and I want to do a little sidebar. A lot of people will talk about humates, they'll talk about humic acids, they'll talk about fulvic acids. Um, they don't sometimes understand the terminology differences. So the way I like to kind of line it out is if you hear me say humates, or sometimes I'll say fulvates. The humates are your soluble salts of humic acid, and your fulvates are your soluble salts of fulvic acid, if you will. But if you hear me reference humic acid singular or fulvic acid singular or humic and fulvic acids plural, you're probably hearing me speak of the raw ore and the constituents of that raw ore. But when I refer to that humates and fulvates, I'm talking about soluble players, okay? Soluble meaning we can put them into a tank mix and they're not going to jam up your screen or clog your tips. But the one thing you want to know about the soluble side of things is that they will stain if you are not careful with your application techniques. So you don't want to stain concrete or siding, and God forbid, chalky aluminum, because that'll really soak up the pigments of your humic and fulvic soluble materials. Now, all that said, when I brought these Russians across, I did it because I was sick of shipping containers from Irkutsk. So I formed this joint venture, and every time I brought it over, that container was the cost of my house, and I had to move it out. But the market really wasn't ready for us, and it wasn't ready for humic and fulvic acids because this was some 30 years ago. So I had to learn how to educate the markets. And what I did was I launched on an endeavor to create a second generation of organic products, because there's the crunchy era where we had used all these meals and all this kind of stuff, and we were going out and changing the world. But that was rather expensive because you always had to apply higher amounts of material to get the results you were looking for. What we did was we used this foundation building block, if you will, called humic and fulvic acids, or humates and fulvates. Um, and we used these building blocks to act as catalysts and synergists to the first generation of organics. And then over time, we realized that it wasn't just that. These materials were synergists and catalysts to all sorts of dynamic biological reactions. And so we started to create granular products. We started to create liquid concentrates, and then the soluble powder formulations came later when we learned how to harness uh, dry microbials, and put them together in a formulation that would be shelf stable, like Josh said, for a very long time. So all of this, and if you look at, and you don't need to, I don't need to sell a stinking thing today. This is really about an education of the soil digestive tract, which Joe alluded to, and then Josh alluded to, and really anyone who has spoken here in one way or another has alluded to. But this soil digestive tract is so analogous to our own, it's not even funny. So there was an old baseball uh, movie, Kevin Costner, The Field of Dreams, build it and they will come. And what I loved that movie. I just enjoyed it very much. And the way I see the soil system or the soil digestive tract is that most of the tools are already there. It's just that we've beaten a lot of it into submission over the years through different mechanical methods. And they're methods that are trying to help us and trying to improve our growing circumstances, but they're band-aid solutions, a lot of the mechanical methods, and they just don't address the root cause, if you will. So what we need to do is we need to take this dirt, as Joe alluded earlier on as well. And we need to help that dirt to come to life and become highly active and interactive, if you will. And of course, the constituent that does that is life itself, right? So, we take these quasi lifeless soils and then we try to do things like aeration and whatnot to try to improve the life of those soils, get some oxygen in there. But I got to this point in my life, and you got to think about this for a minute because I still go out and I still push spreaders, okay? Still climb trees, still dig holes, still do applications out of backpacks and tanks and hoses and JD9 guns and soil injectors. But I'm watching everything and I'm watching how different applications play out. And I've learned that when I just use biology, because I used to be a real big kind of like compost tea guru and a guy that brewed tea. I brewed it for our own use. I brewed it for commercial sale, but would only hold it so long so that it was, optimally biologically active, especially in that coveted fungal biomass and protozoa categories. Because for me, it's easy to grow bacteria. I can grow bacteria out in a compost tea mix pretty rapidly. But it's not the kind of purple non-sulfur phototrophs Joe was referring to earlier, or Josh. But we have accommodated that through fermentation in a different way, in a different setting, rather than brewing compost teas. Where am I going with all this? I got to the point that when I did all this compost tea brewing as a business person, because we still have active service divisions, as a business person, I'm looking at it and I'm going, how the heck do we charge customers for what is a not too expensive material from a standpoint of the materials that go into it? But it's really expensive when you look at the length of time you're brewing, the oxygen or the electric in, the materials in, the setup, and then the cleanup and making sure that you don't have biofilms in the tank, biofilms in all the pipes. You make sure that you're not offloading this compost tea through, pumps that are going to put some real pressure behind there and take your compost tea through a 90-degree turn in an elbow in a pipe, and then smack. It's like running into a telephone pole with a motorcycle, which I've done. It's not comfortable. And the microbes perish. So, how effective is this? And after 2, 3 years of doing commercial applications on site, at first I started seeing results, but then the results dropped off. And I said, well, wait a minute, my results weren't dropping off prior to the whole tea evolution. Um, and the mistake I made, and it was my mistake, and the mistake I made was I went out and I put this tea out and I did not sufficiently augment the applications with microbial food substrates. And then I learned that I couldn't put a bunch of food substrates with that tea because I would get successive bacterial blooms just in the mixing of the materials, let alone running that tank out for half a day or a day. And I would get this bacterial bloom because it didn't have the time to evolve into back into my fungal dominant tea. And so I was kind of defeating the purpose. So I went back into the beginnings of my organic food substrate applications, where I was just feeding the soil, feeding the microbes. And in this dirt, as Joe alluded, I watched over a period of 2 to 3 years how the soil just came back to life. And so from there, I said, okay, now once in a blue moon, we can add an inoculum to tweak the result or to suppress a disease, or to do some bioremediation work after we take whatever toxins in the soil and lock it up like a natural safe, temporarily with humic and fulvic molecules. And we can use those inoculum to bioremediate while we're kind of keeping things in situ with a molecular vault. But that's just one example of where inoculum can still be beneficial. But at the root of it, I have not done research papers upon research papers upon, I don't have that kind of time. I'm out in the field. And so I'm going out and I'm doing these applications and I'm saying, man, I failed there. Why did I fail? That succeeded. Wonder why that worked. And I learned never do too many things at one time. Why not? Because if you do five things, you change five things in the tank, you don't know who to credit or who to blame. But if you do one change, and it takes a lifetime, I'm sitting here telling you, I started at 12, I'm 60, okay? And it takes that 48-year lifetime to make all the mistakes, have a few successes, and come to a few conclusions, okay? And be careful with the conclusions because they shouldn't be too sweeping. Um, but I'll give you an example. So one of our clients is the architect of the Capitol in Washington, D.C. And the way we got them was through a number of referrals. But ultimately, the referrals were saying, hey, architect of the Capitol, you've got this problem, and this guy who doesn't market himself very well, and he's kind of your gun toting, Bible thumping kind of guy. He's up there in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, and as long as you can get past the other sides of him that you may not like, you might want to ask him some questions to help you with some things. So, a food vendor on the mall, spilled a 55-gallon drum of barbecue sauce. Now, we all eat barbecue sauce from time to time, but they were unable to grow any grass where that barbecue sauce had been dumped for 3 years. So when I got called, it was about 20 minutes into it, 25 minutes into the call. And my job was to help remediate that soil where even weeds would not grow. And so basically what we did was we took those some of the most complex carbon molecules known to man on Earth, the humic and fulvic molecules, and we took those molecules in a soluble humate format. We drenched the area first to basically tie stuff up. We used a humate and fulvate version of the soluble materials that was scrubbed. So much of the ion exchange sites were empty. Now we had these positively and negatively charged ion exchange sites that were available for capturing toxins, whatever they may be, and some, of course, beneficial micronutrients and trace elements. But we essentially tied some things up. And then what we did was we brought in, by the way, purple non-sulfur phototrophs as our biological remediator, and we added some really good food substrates, some that were highly bioassimilable. And you will find that we have not just the Growbiotics PX3, which is the purple non-sulfur phototrophs, but we have another product called Growbiotics PAM, like the woman's name Pam, short for Pamela. And it's an acronym that stands for Pure Amino Matrix. Why? Who cares? If you look at this Pure Amino Matrix, which is a mix of protein powders, which if you're into bodybuilding, which I am and I enjoy, and I like getting technical about it. But if you ingest a lot of protein, there are different forms of protein, but if you ingest a lot of highly bioassimilable protein and you do a CBC panel before you start doing the protein, you test the BUN, which is the blood urea nitrogen, right? BUN in your CBC panel. And then you do your protein regimen nice and hot and heavy for 2, 3, 4 weeks. And then you test your CBC panel again with the BUN included, the blood urea nitrogen. you will find that you have an elevated bun in the CBC test results. The doctor might ask you, what is your diet like these days? And you can immediately tell the doctor, I'm ingesting a lot of highly assimilable protein. Why does that matter? I'll tell you exactly why it matters. The protein is that form of protein is so assimilable that bacteria go absolutely nuts for it. And protein converts into nitrogen. Okay. So if you have, I'm going to grab my calculator. I apologize if I just put my face in your faces. But if you have a protein material that is 80% pure protein, just pulling the figure out of the air, and you divide it by a mathematical constant of 6.25, you're going to have about a conversion to 12.8% nitrogen. Kind of interesting, right? So if you look at a lot of the granular fertilizers, because I know I'm making a jump now from a protein powder mix called Growbiotics PAM, I'm making a jump over to um, granular products. And you can get all sorts of different proteins in a granular product. And a lot of them are livestock meals that you would find in livestock feeds. And so you can get protein in there, which then converts to nitrogen. A feather meal. It's not necessarily part of a feed program for livestock necessarily. In some cases, yes. But it is a byproduct of the industry, the poultry industry. And when you digest it, yes, you end up with a nice rate of nitrogen. I'm going by memory, but I think it's 9+% nitrogen. Now, is it the only form you want? No, because remember, you don't just eat steak and throw it into your digestive tract. You should be eating steak and a lot of complex carbohydrates. So we're referring back to this digestive tract analogy, the soil digestive tract, your body digestive tract. So who cares what gives? Well, I'll tell you exactly what gives, because you are what you eat. The more complex and the more, here comes a great phrase. I love this phrase, biologically competitive antagonism. We need to make our guts biologically antagonistic so that we can compete with incoming pathogens, or even if they're not severely pathogenic, but they are of a bacterial or yeast nature that wants to explode in its population. What we want to do is we want to keep it in check. And so it's not always about, and I think it was Dr. Krauss Rich, I think, and I hope I pronounced that correctly. He referred to, it might have been in a Celebrant comment or whatever, but we don't want to just eradicate the grubs. It's not really a realistic goal. It's not even a desired goal. But what we do want to do is we want to try to help this static system of natural checks and balances of microbial life that truly was put in place before we came along as a human race. And it operated fine because of this normal system of checks and balances. This is getting back to the immune system, the soil immune system. Okay, so stated it in the beginning, took a long divergence one way and another way, and we'll probably do it again, and then we'll come back at the end. But the soil immune system is all about having healthy flora, a strong diversity thereof, but not necessarily solely by putting a prebiotic or a probiotic into the system. Because remember, and Joe alluded to the 2.0 pH hydrochloric acid, which is in your stomach, which is being spit out by proton pumps throughout your life. Why you don't end up with acidosis like after day one of proton pumps squeezing hydrochloric acid into your stomach, I don't know. But long story short, that hydrochloric acid is breaking stuff down, preparing it to go into the digestive tract further down the pipe. So you have to ask yourself how many of those flora in that probiotic that you ingest are going to make it through that 2.0 pH system. Some will, some won't. So I looked at that and I said, well, if I want this to work for my system, I've got to put biological food substrates down my hatch so that they make it down all the way through the 2.0 pH and they coat my digestive tract. Why do I want to do that? Because I want to set the table, the proverbial buffet table, with biological food substrates that are extremely healthy. You're eating salmon, you're eating Brussels sprouts, you're eating sweet potatoes as opposed to just baked potatoes, which I'm not all against, but we're talking about healthy substrates in, gives you healthy flora occupying your gut. There's a word I love in all of this because, as Josh alluded to, and someone else earlier today, um, there is no perfect panacea. The perfect panacea, in my opinion, my humble opinion, is an ecologically balanced system such that you have an elasticity built into the system. Why do you want an elasticity? Because you're going to start with temperatures like we're going to have here in Lancaster with wind chills this coming Saturday, give or take supposedly -20, -25 degrees Sunday morning when we wake up. But then this coming summer, it won't be a surprise if we hit 98, 99, 101, 102. That's a pretty big spectrum there, and a heat index of maybe 110. We need elasticity in the system to be able to respond to those natural extremes. So as I formulate products, and I formulate a lot of the products here, and I have a somewhat reasonable say in the matter due to my age, I look back at the things that have worked when I sprayed them out of a tank, which I still do, and the things that work when I spread them out of a spreader. And I say, and then we look under a microscope and we say, what biology responds to these biological food substrates? Where did the microscope come from? The compost tea days. Any of you that do compost tea, you know about microscopes and biological food substrates and all of the above. So um, our products, we don't just make a fertilizer. We try to build a fertilizer that will work on building primarily your fungal biomass, because that's a hard and coveted organism to get populous or well populated in your soil, your living soil digestive tract. I want beneficial fungi, and I want the biological food substrates to add up all year long and then get hit with some nice complex carbons in that fall. And by the way, humic and fulvic compounds, they aren't compost. These are, and I'm taking a tangent. I apologize because I got so much crap stuck up in here. These carbons, if you will, these very aged composts, if you will, are actually stable forms of humus. They have decomposed to the point of becoming stable humus. They are no longer decomposing organic matter. As the Russian scientist, Dr. Boris Levinsky, looked at me because I asked him the same questions that you might have for me. And I sat there and I said, Boris, or Boris, I said, Boris, why doesn't carbon and all life as we know it just decompose into the simplest compounds of decomposition and then just vaporize? And he goes, well, it doesn't. He goes, and I've been looking at this stuff all my life. And for some very odd reason, the simplest compounds known to man of decomposition mysteriously convert into some of the most complex carbon molecules known to man, which are the humic and fulvic acid molecules. Another divergence. There are also ulmic, ULMIC, ulmic molecules, and humans, not like you and me, HUMANS, but humans, HUMINS. And these are all organic compounds and acids under the umbrella term of humic acids, plural, which stands for fulvic, humic, ulmic, and humans. That was my umbrella, and those were my four stems coming down to my handle at the bottom. The four stems are your humic, fulvic, ulmic, and humans. I can get later into some other talk about the applications of each and why they're important and why some people focus on them and why others don't. But you'll hear me talk about the thyroid because the thyroid is a master gland and it's got four hormones: T4, T4, T3, T2, T1, but you don't hear anyone talking about T1, T2, and you only hear them talk occasionally about T3, but they're almost always talking about T4. That's kind of the same way about humic and fulvic and ulmic in humans. But these complex carbon molecules came and converted from these ultra simple byproduct compounds of decomposition of organic matter. This is why I like to work with these materials. So I was trained as an international arborist, a certified arborist, and so I have a love for trees, just the same. Turf is not my only interest, and I love crops, and I have to deal with farmers that do cultivation all the time, and my job is to try to bring the forest floor, which is why I formulated Finesse GBH. I formulated it because I needed to emulate the forest floor because there are all these lawns and agricultural fields and all these other crops down in the southern hemisphere, sand, can't hold organic matter. And I need to get that forest floor into all these different lands. And when you're down in very hot temperatures, say in Miami, okay, where organic matter just kind of burns up naturally, even down in the soil, you need stable humus to build a foundation building block. And once you do that, you can change the face of how things operate down in Florida, literally in sand. So, because it remains stable and it doesn't just oxidize or burn up. Because when you take carbon and you take unstable carbon and you introduce it to oxygen, you get carbon, you get oxygen, you get carbon dioxide, and it burns up into the atmosphere. And voila, we have so-called greenhouse effect. We have carbon dioxide blowing off. And unfortunately, that means that the carbon in our soil, the carbon sink, is depleting. Okay. And we want that carbon. Why? Because we want the fungal biomass. Why do we want that? Because we want it in addition to the bacteria. Why do we want that? And why do we want them? Because we want the protozoa, which are the soil nutrient recyclers. So in a forested system, you've got loads of protozoa. Why? Because they're recycling everything. How do we know that? Because we don't have to go in and do soil injections in the forest or granular applications. It's performing all on its own based on carbon that's been dropped from limbs, from leaves, from tree trunks, all of the above. And it's just decomposing. And the soil profiles are just layered upon layered upon layered of all different depths of decomposition. That is why I produced and formulated Finesse GBH to emulate that creation of that forest floor. Why should I emulate and create, or why should I create something that came out of this head when I can go to the forest, I can study it, I can break it down, and I can say, how do I emulate that? So you take all of that and you ask yourself a question. So this is, again, back to the soil immune system. If we have a healthy gut flora, and we are eating the proper foods. Let's not eat junk. Let's not eat candy, cake, ice cream. Let's not do that and then stick a probiotic down our gullet because we're kind of defeating the purpose. It's like Dr. Doolittle's two-headed pony or whatever it was. One's pulling this way, the other one's pulling that way. No one gets anywhere. So what you try to do is you try to improve the biological food substrates going into your gut. If you are successful at that, you will grow out a healthy and diverse flora in the gut, which is biologically antagonistic and not going to be hospitable to disease pathogens. This is not theory. I've been doing this 48 years of my life, and I can take you onto properties where I don't get the summer disease control or disease pathogen pressure that other properties get. As a matter of fact, one property many years ago on one of the wealthiest roads in Lancaster County by one of the highest end country clubs. I don't golf. I apologize. But the superintendent came up this road beside the country club, and the superintendent said, I don't know why you are talking with this guy from Organic Approach. He doesn't know what the hell he's talking about. And I said, you're perfectly fine by me if you want to buy into what he says. That homeowner bought into the fungicide approach. Not a problem. One of our current customers now that's been a customer since this all played out, probably 7 years ago or more, maybe 9 years ago. Kevin is his name. I won't say his last name. Kevin went to the property and he's called onto the property and he said, I'll work with Penn State University and we will get this pathogen cleaned up. He went into the property, he made the applications exactly as the plant pathology department from Penn State University told him to make the applications, and guess what? The whole damn lawn collapsed. It collapsed like it was somewhere between 1.5 and 2.5 months after he began the applications. He could not suppress the pathogen adequately as he was trying to. He killed the beneficials. The beneficials were the last to respond. As you heard Josh say earlier, oftentimes when you go after these pests, the pests are, knocked back. But because they have so many generations in a year, they have this ability to become resistant faster than a beneficial fungi that I've been telling you I've been trying to grow from the forest floor through a product that I emulated into Finesse GVH. That takes time. The pathogens, they love to multiply and replicate very quickly. So they build this resistance to the fungicide. So you go out and you make an application. Next thing you know, you got to go to a different material. Next thing you know, you got to go to a different material because you keep building resistances. The damn thing collapsed. I get the phone call and they're like, can you do something with this? I'm like, yes. I did not rub their face in it because I should have said, you should have listened to me, but I didn't. So I went in and I reinstalled the lawn, a fescue lawn, and the fescue is always most susceptible to disease attack in its first summer following seeding. It's too young. It don't have a thick skin yet. But once you get into year 2 and year 3 and year 4, the thick skin gets thicker. That turf gets more resistant, and at the same time, you're building all these biologically competitive antagonist communities, and now the system starts to work by itself. So let's talk about disease control. Let's talk about this. It's like 2:41. I'm running at the mouth. I apologize. You can tell I'm passionate. But what I'm talking about right now isn't just relative to turf. If you think it is, think again, because it's relative to plant life and microbial life and soil digestive tracts worldwide. Set the table properly with the proper, intelligently chosen biological food substrates. Know what ingredient you're putting in that tank because it's the same thing as knowing what you're putting down your stomach. If you put the right foods into your stomach and then you put the right foods into that tank, because that's what they are, they're biological food substrates, make no mistake. If you want to salt your intestinal tract, then you can eat a lot of table salt. But if you want to grow out, I didn't just say this, but if you want to really ingest some nice, pure, pasteurized, etc., humic and fulvic compounds, I do. As a matter of fact, I don't know if you can see this, but this is an example of me putting crap in my gut that I want to grow out healthy flora so that I stay healthy. This is the same approach we take to the soil and to the ecosystem above the ground on the plants. We actually endeavor to create a good feeding system of microbes, not from a probiotic standpoint as anywhere near as much as from a prebiotic standpoint. I have helped farmers to take late blight in tomatoes and very heavily suppress the onslaught of late blight disease by simply using LC10 plus 7, which is a liquid concentrated 10% humate solution with 7 micronutrients in homeopathic levels. Okay, that's it. And the micronutrients are chelated by the humic and fulvic molecules. When you put that on a plant, you've got a lot of different things going on. Pathogens, just so you all know, do not like to use large, gargantuan humic and fulvic molecules, carbon molecules. They don't like to use those materials as biological food substrates, meaning they don't like to eat it or assimilate as a food source. It's just the way it is in nature. I had nothing to do with it. I just studied it, okay? Studied it, observed it, made mistakes, got stained, working with the materials. So it's no joke. But to Josh's point, a lot of the products that we produce, they are literally whole food supplements for soil, for plant leaf and tissue surfaces. So for soil, Carbo Grow 303, Finesse GVH, for foliar tissue applications, Hyperlink, Nourish. The complexity of that product and the number of ingredients that goes into that product to create the same as what's here, which is 25 to 30 fruits and vegetables in this ugly looking swill water, if you will, which also has purified fulvic acids in it. And I'm sitting here and I'm drinking it. Why? Because I want to set the table in the smartest possible fashion I can for the flora in my gut so that I have a biologically, antagonistically competitive digestive tract. If I succeed, I will be, as a general statement, a healthy individual. That does not mean that I can correct structural deficiencies within my body if I have said deficiencies. It means that my immune system, based on the health of my gut, is firing on all cylinders, hopefully. So when you want to talk about a soil immune system, we're doing the same thing as we're doing here in our gut. Whatever we put into that tank mix or into that hopper for a dry material or both, we now should be thinking about what are we putting in there? Who is it feeding? Not what plant, what turf, or what oak or beech or rhododendron or crepe myrtle. No. What biology is it feeding? And how will that biology improve that plant or that crop of turf grass? How will it improve their chances to respond to stressors that will always be thrown at you and me as contractors every day of our lives? Golf courses, vineyards, viticulturalists. I work with viticulturalists. I'm telling you right now, they are growing one of the most difficult crops there is to grow. Putting greens, orchards, viticulturalists, all of the above. Some of the most difficult crops to grow. You have got to think outside the box because you have to, watch this, box out the pathogens. You have to box them out. You have to preclude them before they get established. How do you do that? You starve them. Okay. How do you starve them? You put Brussels sprouts in front of a kid. Does the kid want to eat Brussels sprouts? No. Do you? Do I? If we're thinking about being healthy, yeah, we might eat some Brussels sprouts, okay? Not my favorite, but I'd eat them for health and nutritional purposes and for my sanity. And you can see I've got problems with that. So, long story short, I will run over if I don't stop soon. There's so many other things that I have to say. But obviously, we're a believer in purple non-sulfur phototrophs. When a good phototrophic, meaning light loving organism is desired, because you want a light loving organism that likes UV rays. Because if you put an inoculum on a plant or into a turf above ground grass ecosystem, I think we probably want that organism not to get neutralized by UV rays because we just paid for it and we're hoping it's going to do a job for us, right? So we want to use an organism that is light loving and is going to hang around and offer us some biologically competitive antagonism with regard to our disease pathogen, as one statement. The mowing concept, real quick. I'm telling you right now, all of our properties, we don't mow, but all the properties that we care for organically, all of the clients listen to me. They mow, or they have their contractors mow at 3.75 inches until the temperature hits 87 degrees. At 87 degrees as a daily temperature, contractor flips to 4 inches. Everybody's got their little spin on that. That's my spin. Works beautifully. Crabgrass, hey, not for nothing, but we don't have hardly any crabgrass pressure at all. I do agree with Joe in that first spring after a seeding. I like to see a synthetic pre-emerge. It's a little too much nitrogen with corn gluten for a tall fescue that doesn't want a lot of high end. But because you got to use high amounts of corn gluten in order to get a half decent result with a pre-emergent effect, I like to see a good synthetic, a wisely chosen synthetic used that one time. It sets the stage. It buys that fescue time to establish, thicken, get the rhizomes going, and then hopefully not too dense of a canopy, because that first summer again is the one where disease hits most likely because it doesn't yet have a thick skin. Um, I don't know if I've touched on everything, but I guess I should probably get ready to hand this over to questions from the audience. I hope I've addressed some of the soil immune system from a standpoint of how it generally tries to function, which is this competitive biological antagonism. And if you put the good foods in, you get the good players in, and then you get that pathogen suppression naturally. And I probably didn't give you enough of the history of my life, but you probably don't want to hear that anyway. Um, Compost teas, we did that. How about we leave it at that? We obviously are a manufacturer. I take a lot of pride in being an American manufacturer because so much of the stuff is made abroad. And I'd like to see the US get away from that. And I know what is going into the products that we ship out of here. I know I got to sleep at night, and I care about you. I care about your families. So that's the end of that. Joe, you good?
Yeah, I'm great, Eric. I'm much more knowledgeable than I was an hour ago. So thank you. Great job. And we always, as you know, we we think very much alike. Conversations I have with you and
Yeah.
Josh, I always value. So thank you, Yoda. I have I have some questions. What the hell was in that barbecue sauce that caused
Yeah.
the lawn? Like what is in barbecue? Do you have any idea? What it's scary
I,
because
I don't, but that's the beauty of it though. So the beauty of that was I said, I don't have the time. You're asking me this question right now. not meaning you, meaning Michael, the guy
Yeah.
down there at the architect of the Capitol. And he's like, I just need to know if I can get grass growing. I'm like, you'll get grass growing. We've just got to cordon off the offenders to buy time for the microbes to successfully populate and to begin their work without getting killed toxically before they can get on with their job. And so your question's a great one. I can't answer your question, but I can tell you that what we did was we cordoned everything off and we bought time for the biology to do its job. And it did its job. And then we just continued with that biological revolution by putting down the right food substrates. Nothing to be harmful, just nice, gentle stuff to grow them out. So,
Yeah. I'm looking up, what the standard ingredients are in barbecue sauce, and you would think it would actually be a very good prebiotic because it's a lot of sugars, a lot of carbon source stuff. It has to be the preservatives, something they put in,
of course.
right?
Yeah.
Meant to kill a microbe. Well, guess what it's going to do once you throw that on the soil? So that's just my guess. But and
Well, it was 55 gallons. So
yeah, that's quite a
remember, as
bit.
grandma always says,
Yep.
everything in moderation.
I know because I love barbecue and wings, so I'm not going to stop that. But um, and I'm a huge fan of Field of Dreams as well. But yeah, we've used these purple photosynthetics are amazing microbes, and they really are. People that Google them, they are amongst the most versatile class of bacteria. Um, they can go heterotroph, they're like the ones we got, they're heterotroph. They can go anaerobic, aerobic. They can't go to spore form. So in other words, they can't go to inert, they can't go to sleep. And what that does is make them survivors. So they will find a carbon source and adapt their enzyme profiles to eat whatever. We've used them. I had to sign a non-disclosure, but to clean up oil spills. And when we had the big Gulf oil spill years ago, they're throwing all these chemicals down. It wasn't the chemicals that eventually cleaned it up. It was the microbes that, yep, exactly, ate that
Eating and
oil.
burping. Burp.
They're all right, exactly. They're all just carbon chains, whether it's glucose that we can digest or petroleum and like octane that bacteria can find the enzymes to digest. It's really neat stuff. And what these bacteria can do for remediation is great. Is that what would you suggest for we get calls a lot, like, urine stains from dogs, salt remediation. Would you suggest these same products for those type of remediations as well?
Yeah. Again, starting with the prebiotic approach first, and you can take that to a whole different level because I've done trials with livestock animals. So I can take, so we have SP90 is our soluble humate powder, and I can take
Mhm.
SP90 and I can put 1/8 of a teaspoon in that soluble humate powder in 1 gallon of water, which, by the way, I put some vitamin C in to blow off the chlorine gas out of that 1 gallon of water in case someone pulled that out of a tap. But I do that first, and it's almost instant. And then put 1/8 of a teaspoon of soluble humate powder in, SP90, shake it up, and give that to the dog to drink. As an example, ours drinks it every day, all day long. The problem that we have is when it rains out in the driveway and there's a puddle and the dog goes out and drinks out of the puddle. Next thing you know, I got a dead spot in the lawn. But if that dog only gets that water with soluble humate in it, I get no dead spots.
Hmm.
And with the livestock animals, we've done it with broilers, layers, meaning chickens, poultry, with cows for somatic cell count, which is an immune, kind of like a white blood cell immune response. And we've done it with pigs, goats. So we've done it with a lot of different livestock animals. And did I miss your question? Pea spots. So what you're doing is pea spots. You're getting a lot of this protein in the dog food, and you're getting sodium in the dog food, and you're getting these nutrient salts coming out the back end of, or the ass end of the dog, if you will. And you get literally a reverse osmotic effect where the salts, if you will, are outside of the roots of the grass plants in these pea spots. And when those concentrations are high enough just outside the root in the rhizosphere, higher than they are inside the plant, you get this wicking effect of the water out of the plant, which basically creates a desert-like impact on that grass plant, and it dies, but it died because it dried the heck up, and the water was wicked right out of the plant. Um, so the humate buffers the sodium index, and it takes the nitrate salts and it turns carbon complexes, those nitrates, into stable forms of organic nitrogen. And when you buffer the sodium index and you take care of that nitrate salt effect, now your plant can continue on until it rains or gets irrigated or whatever, and you leach out some of the problematic offenders. And that's how that works.
Yeah, that's
Does that make
yeah,
sense?
yeah, yeah, and I'm sure you could back this up, but just even the beneficial microbes, when they coat the roots, and I don't know if you're on earlier, we showed some of the videos of them going back and forth. They can form these biofilms, and they essentially become like the moat system for a castle for these roots. So even in poor
Oh, yeah.
soils, if you have good biologicals, they can control that microenvironment right outside the root zone. So you're not going to necessarily remediate the soil and change a pH in the high fours or low fives, which is not atypical in this part of the country, now and then. You're not going to change the soil pH like that, but you can make the plant able to grow better with good biology in the soil and like the humic acids to buffer that. It's
Yep.
really a great combo. We've used it for all kinds of remediations.
Well, those microbes are we call them the gatekeepers.
Yep.
So they're deciding what goes in, what goes out, what happens, who's kicking who around. Yeah, the gatekeepers. I love that.
Yep.